Hello, this is Lina Tagliara.
Let's Talk Tech is in Innovation Zero, Kensington, Olympia, and we're heading to the press hub somewhere. This private suites here.
See, he was he opened, in fact, after Liam Fox, he opened the event, and I think by his own admission, after sort of regaling us with a somewhat challenging, I won't say pessimistic, I'll say challenging assessment of the situation, I think he finished off on quite an upbeat note, saying the big takeaway that I took from what you were saying is that we really need to influence that demand side and people's behaviour, which I think with anything is always the challenge. Anyway, that's enough from me. If you can just say your name and your title and then throw your question into Jim. I think we've got about 15 minutes, so short, sharp, and let's get away. So just stick your hand up, person in the front row.
Hello, hi, I'm Olivia Wedgard from Bloomberg Green. So I write about green living a lot of the time. We're trying to make the transition sort of more relatable, more relevant to people's lives, and with that in mind, the sort of demand side. Can you talk at all about your own life and, you know, we're putting together some lists of sort of climate vices of things that people have struggled to kind of overcome in their own life, of things that are kind of high carbon activities. Is there something that you've sort of tackled yourself, or, you know, can you talk at all about that?
Right, okay. Okay. My guilty thing, which is not altogether a secret, is that to be chair of IPCC you have to fly a lot. There is just no way around it. It's a global conversation and you need to go places. So we are offsetting everything with gold standard offsets. That's what we're doing. And we take other measures, like we try to combine meetings. You know, if we go for a formal session of IPCC, we try to combine outreach, so you combine as many trips, package everything together. Now, in terms of London, well, I walked here this morning because I live not that far away. I haven't owned a car for more than a decade, and I typically cycle around London. So these are the kind of things I've done. I haven't to say I was particularly motivated by climate change to take these steps. The thing is, I think you can have a high quality life while continuing to do these things. It does not destroy the quality of your life to take these sustainable steps. So I did it for other reasons, but there's a happy benefit, is that my carbon footprint when I'm at home is pretty low.
Next question.
Anthony Mehta, Ethical Corp. You talking about the demand side, over the last year we've seen most of the oil and gas companies decide that they're going to increase production, and they say, well, the demand is there, we need to be providing the energy. What is the solution to that?
Well, just to say, we need to go, IPCC, to use the slogan, is policy relevant but not policy prescriptive. So the way we have messaged that is to point out that the amount of oil and gas reserves in the world exceed the carbon budgets for 1.5 or getting close to 2 degrees warming. So the strong message in there, if we want to continue to develop new oil and gas reserves and be compliant with the Paris goals, a lot of that oil and gas is going to need to stay in the ground. So there's obviously a risk for investors. They're putting a bet against the future of climate policy.
In the front row.
Madeleine from New Scientist. You obviously are Scottish, chair of the IPCC. Scotland's in a bit of turmoil at the moment. Appreciate you might not be able to comment specifically on the actions of the Scottish Government ditching their interim climate targets, but how much do you worry that the reports of the IPCC and its conclusions are not being listened to by politicians?
Well, they're being listened to. Otherwise, we wouldn't have net zero targets that cover 80% of global emissions, for example. So the concepts of net zero and the ideas have gone through. The question, I think, and it's really for governments to answer, not ask, is whether they're being acted on, because I think they're certainly being listened to. The fact that the very phrase net zero is in the title of a government department whose minister is coming along to talk to this very conference is an indicator that people have heard the messages from IPCC. Whether they have picked up on all of the information on policy, specific policy interventions, which we have described the consequences of, is not so clear.
Next question.
The UK is the...
Just tell us where you're from, sorry.
So Lina Tayara, Let's Talk Tech. I have a podcast raising awareness about tech and energy, focusing on data centers. The UK is the first market in Europe with, as far as data centers are concerned. You know how much energy the AI-enabled data centers will require. What are your thoughts about how we're going to power up these data centers of the future?
Well, we have not, just to say, IPCC reports, we are not a 24/7 news organisation, that's for sure. We take 6 or 7 years to conduct our cycles. I have to say AI did not specifically get really much attention in the latest reports. The cut-off date for the literature, I think, was about late 2021. So that's as far as we've got. Wait till the next reports and we might say something about it. We have flagged up the fact that data centers are obviously major users of energy. They're users of electricity. So perhaps if we move to lower carbon electricity systems, then some of these effects may be more diminished.
Is your report going to cover nuclear energy?
Our reports have always covered nuclear energy in some way or other. They cover the entire range. So the scenario, right, IPCC does not do research. It assesses other people's work and brings it all together. And I should say there are about 45,000 articles a year now published with climate change somewhere in the title or the abstract. So it's not an easy job to do it. So we have covered scenarios which cover nuclear power, and the general message is that nuclear power increases in all of these scenarios, but it is not as dominant as the increase in renewable energy. That would be the message that comes out.
Okay, thank you. Hello, this is Lina Tayara, Let's Talk Tech from Innovation Zero at Kensington Olympia, and we have with us excellent editor, London-based, UK-based editor, who's going to give us an overview about the market in the UK. So Andy, nice to meet you. Can you tell us who you are in your own words?
Yeah, sure. Andy Cameron-Smith, editorial director at Unlock Net Zero, which is a knowledge portfolio looking at the transition to net zero, primarily focused on UK housing, built environment and property sectors, but looking at the wider question of place-based decarbonisation in the UK as well.
So from your observation being focused on this market, what is your assessment of government policies or government drive towards net zero?
So I think you can say it's a little bit of a checkered history, and I think there are great ambitions that are being laid out. I mean, we've had them in various different kind of green strategies, the Green Industrial Revolution, which was launched a couple of years ago. But where we are, I think, in this debate is now it's all about implementation and it's about delivery. And what we have as we look out to 2050 is we have an ever-shrinking timescale for us to deliver. And one of the real questions we have to overcome in the UK is not about what the technologies and innovations we need to do, what is the infrastructure which we need to address. It is very much about the volume and the scale of what we need to deliver. So if we look in the buildings market, the built environment for example, there are estimates that there's between 27 to 29 million properties which will need retrofitting between now and 2050. So that's over 1 million a year which we should be doing, and we're behind the curve on that. So we really do need to take what we know now, put it into implementation, learn from doing, and try and deliver it.
So in an election year, who is driving this, or who do you think should be driving this?
I think it's down to individual politicians to drive it, but it's also to us as the electorate to drive and ask the questions about what people are going to be doing about our future. My fear is it becomes a bit of a political football over the next few months. What I'd like to see is a educated, informed debate looking at the evidence. I think it is true to know for people that net zero and decarbonisation is expensive. We shouldn't hide that from people. But what we should be talking about is what are those practical steps and practical solutions to get to a successful transition. And when we talk about a transition, it has to be a transition that benefits all. It can't just be for people who can afford to pay for this. This has to encounter all of society.
Do we have anyone talking about the cost of not doing the transition as opposed to the cost of actually doing the transition?
I'd say the kind of debate that I've seen at the minute is very much about the cost of doing this, but not the cost of not doing it. And I know it's not in the UK, but I read something recently that there have been 50 weather events in the in the US, which have all come with $1 billion cleanup bill attached to them. So we've suddenly started to see as our weather patterns affect us, and we've gone through a very, very wet winter in the UK, which has had extensive flooding around areas which haven't flooded before. Those costs start to go up, but not everybody, I think, is making a direct correlation between the cost of, say, prevention and the cost of.
So would it be fair to say that we are aligned in terms of media communication, in terms of moving conversation from an ideological one to one about science and information for public interest? This is what got us talking here today.
Yeah.
How can we do this? How can we grow this movement away from ideologies of politicians, which a lot of people, frankly, are complaining about?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we have to have evidence-based discussions. But I think there's a challenge to us as communicators as well. We need to demystify this debate. It is too technical, it is too economic for the vast majority of people to take on. When we talk about energy systems and we talk about technologies, people talk about gigawatts of power. Who really knows what gigawatt power is? So what we have to do is bring it down. We need to talk human to people about why we are doing this. And yes, there are some economic benefits for people, but we're also doing this so people can live better lives. And I think sometimes we lose the personal part of this whole transition, and it's just framed in a technical or an economic.
So most voters would be concerned, and actually decision makers know that most voters would be concerned about the cost of living and the utility bills. And if they are to be told that they're going to be increased as opposed to decreased because we need to do an energy transition, obviously they're going to be an and nobody's giving the other side of this argument, the nuanced argument, the fact that actually the earth is going to be suffering tremendously if we continue the way we are. So how do you recommend or suggest to politicians and communicators and the media to raise awareness of this issue? How do you suggest that we can do this?
I think you have to bring it back to people's lives, and to use a hackneyed phrase, what's in it for me? So if you look at kind of decarbonisation activity, retrofit activity in homes, which involves better insulation of homes, solar on the roof kind of thing, you will very quickly get an economic payback on that. So you have to understand what's the motivation of the individual. And I think at the minute, because of the current economic environment, people are more likely to be motivated by economic payback than they are by saving carbon emissions. So we shouldn't be afraid to flip our communication to that and say, well, if you do this will save you X on your energy bill every year. You'll live in a warmer, better ventilated home. You'll feel healthier. So that becomes a motivation for people to want to do it, to make it aspirational, rather than just say, if you do this, you save carbon emissions. For us, if the end outcome is the emissions come down, we shouldn't be too worried about how people engage to get to that end outcome.
Also in our conversation earlier, we were at the West briefing, and you mentioned your concern about the messages coming out of number 10, and that you get the sense that the Prime Minister is not very much in tune with the net zero targets. What did you hear that makes you concerned? Why do you think he's not, fully behind this net zero agenda?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously he continues to make the commitment to net zero. It's a policy kind of thing. I think some of the announcements last year, which pushed back some of the targets and stuff for us to move to net zero in 2050, is a little bit of an alarming for people that are working in the industry. But as I started out by saying, this is all about implementation now. This is not about, technologies to deliver net zero are pretty well known. They're just underdeveloped and commercialised. So I don't think we have the luxury of time waiting for what you might perceive the right answer. We've got to take what we know now, implement it, learn from it, refine and move that forward. So for me, it's about anything that kind of lets people think we can take a step back. And yes, we've made some great strides in cutting emissions in the UK, but that's all in power generation. What we haven't really got into is cutting the emissions that we see in people's homes, the kind of transport that we use. And that's the big kind of challenge we need to get to. To get to net zero in the UK, if we don't decarbonise heat, we have a real problem and we won't get to net zero. So we've really got to put our foot on that accelerator.
Thank you very much, Andy. That was very useful. High-level thoughts here from a very seasoned analyst of the UK market.
We're making billions in profit, record-breaking profit, but you're taking their money instead of fighting for a livable future. How dare you? Who do you work for? Who do you work for? Stop polluting politics. Why are you taking money from oil companies? Why are you taking money from oil companies?
I'm really ready to put your questions.
We're in a climate crisis.
Take the money. Just do something.
The climate science is here, and they think it's really
I would urge you, if you have questions that you would like to put to the Chancellor, I'm here, I'll ask them. So just tell me what you want to ask and I will put them to the Chancellor. And I mentioned that some of the questions that I'm going to be putting to the Chancellor are questions that our panellists that are going to be coming up next have put forward. But first of all,
why is the Chancellor paying £500 million to foreign oil companies to start new digging in the North Sea? Why is the Chancellor doing that? Why is the Chancellor robbing our pensioners to pay for his rich people in the city and corporations? That will pay for 14,000 nurses, and I'm being grabbed by these. Ow!
okay, so I'm going to
Ow! Ow!
How is the government's legal commitment, which I just mentioned, to hitting net zero by 2050 going to be hit? If, as we've been hearing from your Energy Secretary this morning, the government now wants to leave everything up to the market?
Well, I don't think that is what the Energy Secretary is saying. The first thing to say is that we are absolutely committed to net zero, and we are very proud of the fact that we have decarbonised faster than any other major economy.
Well, we're going to come to that. Okay.
Shall I answer that question?
You answer it, because it's on my list of questions, but go ahead, yes.
Let's talk about Rosebank and North Sea oil and gas licenses. So we became the first major country to pass a law that made us legally committed to net zero. It's very important that everyone understands that commitment is to net zero. There are no credible independent experts who think it's possible to produce zero carbon at all in an economy by 2050. What we want to do is to make sure the impact on the climate amounts to zero. So, for example, the North Sea has the capacity to store 78 billion tonnes of carbon. That's about 200 years of our emissions in this country. And so what we want to do is to make sure that we're having no negative impact on the planet by then. Now, as part of that transition, we will still need fossil fuels in 2050 for a proportion of our energy. And if those fossil fuels come from the North Sea, they have about 3 times less carbon footprint than if they're imported from the other side of the world. So a sensible transition is part of the way that we will deliver net zero, and that's why we don't think it is good for the climate and good for our transition to net zero to stop all North Sea oil and exploration.
And so what we really need now is not huge top-down statements about what the plan is going to look like. What we need is rules, regulations and frameworks that allow very rapid action. And by the way, I don't know if everyone knows this, but for example, Germany for a long time wanted to build liquid natural gas terminals, huge ports where you take gas from ships into the system. And it was mired in regulatory bureaucracy for a number of years. And then the energy crisis came. And in 1 year, during the energy crisis, gas crisis, Germany got 5 of those massive projects through their bureaucracy. And by the way, Germany's good at bureaucracy, right? It got 5 of them through in 1 year. It used the same kind of techniques as we used to create vaccines during COVID. We haven't done the same with renewables. And it's entirely doable. We can do it for all of the components of the system we need. And the tragedy is, for example, even if we'd done that for renewables during the energy crisis, even during the crisis, we would have saved billions of pounds to the nation. And we've had the infrastructure that brought energy costs down and enabled us to enjoy cheaper, cleaner energy for the next 2 or 3 decades.
So this question of people having renewables projects that are already financed, planning permission, but can't get a grid connection, what's the project's view of how to accelerate that?
Yeah, look, first of all, there are 2 main barriers to building stuff. That is planning and permitting, and the ability to get a grid connection. On planning and permitting, the UK, and indeed every other country, went about the renewable revolution in the worst possible way. Right? So, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, we started turning up in beauty spots and erecting huge wind turbines, and in return we put a new item on everyone's energy bill for environmental levies. So we literally put energy costs up whilst bringing unpopular infrastructure. And we needed to reverse that. Yeah, the reality today is that every wind turbine reduces our energy costs. Every solar farm reduces our energy costs. But when we build them, that just goes into the great big reward for the energy system. So people who live locally don't benefit. And they don't believe that. No one believes that this is going to bring down costs. So what we really need to do is say, look, if your town, my hometown had a debate not that long ago about whether or not to allow Asda out-of-town supermarkets to be built. And the debate was really straightforward. The people in the area were choosing, do we want an Asda with all its special offers and big range, or do we want to leave those fields as such and have less traffic? It was their choice. And we need to sit with energy, which is like, if the community say, look, we want cheap electricity, we'll have some wind turbines nearby. What you'll do is reverse NIMBYism to NIMBYism. And we can do the same with batteries, with solar, with transmission infrastructure. In fact, it's actually like, at the moment, the community protests against pylons, towers as they like to call them, are holding back the whole nation from cheap energy. If we reverse this and say, hey look, who wants to host this infrastructure? And in return you'll get cheap power, you have communities competing for it. And this is just a theory. We subsidise all wind turbines. And we said to the communities that live nearby, you get cheap power when it's windy, in real time. And what we thought we'd do is we'd see people using more electricity when it's windy, and you certainly did. And by the way, not only do they use more electricity when it's windy, they're more interested in heat pumps, they're more interested in electric vehicles, they're more interested in getting rid of gas. But on top of that, 22,000 communities and individuals contacted us asking for wind turbines. Right? So this is totally possible. We can do it tomorrow.
Actually, the Spanish, about 10, 15 years ago,
we're starting to do that. You know, actually making sure the communities benefited from a hilltop wind farm. And suddenly you saw,
and in the UK, we always have this thing that, like, if you build a wind turbine, you might build a scalper. But that's not it. When you build an answer, you get cheap goods. You don't get a scalper. And when you build electricity infrastructure, you should do cheap electricity, because then it's directly benefit from that infrastructure. And it demonstrates the truth, which is renewables are the cheapest power, especially while they're generating. So we need these kind of initiatives. By the way, the other one, grid, you know, because we've got these monopoly grids, not just in the UK, in the vast majority of countries. You know, you've got a company like ours, we've got customers crying out for cheap, clean energy. Not just households. Imagine the AI revolution. Every major tech company is desperate for electricity. And yet, by the way, there are vast swathes to the west of London where there's a 10-year moratorium on building new housing, new data centres, new warehouses. Slough is the European capital for data centres, and you can't build anything because we haven't got electricity. Meanwhile, at the exact same time, in Scotland right now, we spend billions a year turning off wind farms when it's windy. If we have regional pricing, for example, then when it's windy, Scotland would have the cheapest electricity in Europe. In fact, Scotland would have the cheapest electricity in Europe, full stop. Those data centres would be delighted to build right now in Scotland with access to super cheap, super clean power. And a lot of this is probably going to get worse, so we build more renewables, so we'll end up with more feast and famine if we don't, for example, reflect that by having much more dynamic markets. By the way, I should say,
that does it like in combination with better grid connections and the storage.
A really interesting thing about dynamic markets is, for example, electricity in Scotland will be super cheap. So if you're building electricity infrastructure, you might start building it in regions where it's more expensive, because you get a higher price. You'll need less transmission. You know, if we build, if we have cheaper prices in Scotland to reflect wind, and the data center move there, we need less grid to bring the electricity pointlessly to England, right? So, like in every market, sensible pricing leads to better allocation. And I did more about my age. There's a few people here who may remember when the EU had these wine-laced bookmats. We were literally paying farmers to make grapes that we turn into wine and then fill swimming pools with it and hope one day to turn into vinegar. Because we didn't have pricing. That's exactly what electricity is doing today.
It's interesting how the opposition to net zero, led by a smallish but very, very vocal number of people, have sort of seized on cost as a negative. Whereas actually the kind of scenario you want to describe, we all know about renewables, is actually there's a cost advantage with net zero. What's your thought about that, and how that kind of argument is combated? I mean, you projected, if you haven't seen it, look it up, you projected the Union Jack onto a wind turbine, or several wind turbines, to make the point, homegrown renewable power is cheaper.
Yeah.
And you don't depend on a despot to flog you gas or whatever. But how does one recapture an initiative to say that actually there is a cost benefit?
So first of all, if anyone's seen the movie Thank You for Smoking, the astonishing power of the tobacco lobby, first of all to deny the tobacco, it killed people, and when they lost that argument, to claim that they can make healthy cigarettes with low tar and filters, that brought them another 10 or 15 or 20 years. And finally, to find new routes to market, for example, going to poorer countries. The fossil fuel lobby are doing exactly the same. And if the tobacco lobby were powerful, they'd do nothing on probably the most powerful industry in the world. And that's not to be conspiracy theory about it. It's just that if you're a fossil fuel company, your assets are oil and gas in the ground. The last thing you want is not only for a world where people don't want our products, but actually to be writing down the value now, because we're saying that product's got a limited life, because there's a competitor that will outcompete that product. And so, in my way, employs some of the best people in the world, incredible engineers, but they've spent their entire life in that world, and it's very hard for them to see a world in which that's not the case. It's like, forgive me for this, but like print journalists initially really struggling with the idea of the internet. And even today, the media is still getting used to that world. versus
when I started my first reporting job, I was doing to a typewriter and an ashtray.
well, you've done very well. So I think I think in the same way, what you've got is a whole load of people who just don't understand the world in which we don't need an empire. Like wind and solar, once you build the infrastructure, you don't need to fuel it. And so when it's windy and sunny, we get free power. So of course there's an infrastructure cost, just like there is with, oil rigs and, gas-fired power stations. And but sometimes most of the cost in electricity is cheaper. And so I think whenever you hear these arguments about, for example, a gas boiler is cheaper than a heat pump, I'm going to have a deep philosophical argument about the fact that that's forgetting that we're dumping the effluent into our very 60 miles of atmosphere. But actually, far more importantly, what they forget is that during the gas crisis, gas was so expensive, it was 15 times higher than usual. The government has to pay 2/3 or 3/4 energy costs. The government commits something. The UK government alone committed on about £100 billion. £100 billion just to pay our energy bills for a year or two. Right? If we'd been building renewables, the impacts of that energy crisis would have been dramatically lower. And an interesting thing about renewables is the more we build, the cheaper it gets. Look, a great example would be, we as a company have got 150,000 electric vehicle drivers who integrated their car by connecting it to us or their charger. And every day when they get there, they plug in, and then we just optimize when we charge the car against 29 variables, but mostly it's about when there's renewables on the grid. Those drivers, even today, when renewables are only 40% of their about 50% of our electricity, those drivers can do 100 miles for £2.30. With a diesel car, it's £16. And as we start to electrify heating, of course we're going to get the cost of heat pumps down. That's happening. I mean, I think the cost of heat pumps has fallen by roughly a third in 2 years, and that's astonishing. But the cost to run them is already lower than a gas boiler if you use smart tariffs.
So these are the kind of stats that we should all be equipped with in debates about net zero. I really hate having to say this, but we're out of time.
It's been fun.
It's been fun, and we could do several hours. But I'm really sorry to say it's over. But I'm just going to run out of time one quick thing. The next person on this stage will be Ed Miliband. Just give me a quick question that you would like me to put to him, very, very briefly.
The first thing is we have to be very politically neutral, but I think the question for me is, what are the big decisions? Because I think the reality here is we need some great decisions. For example, I'll give you mine. I think it is untenable that we will ever heat our homes with hydro. For a whole pile of reasons, mainly physics and economics. And the sooner we can make those decisions, actually the more we can deliver a fair transition, because look, 55% of the people that join our company to install heat pumps were formerly gas engineers. And we need to offer a path to a bright future for all of the great people who currently work in industries like gas. And the sooner we do this, actually, the fairer we can be, building the training programs, and give them the confidence about what decisions they should make for their careers. And the amazing thing about renewables and the transition we have, it will create far more jobs than will be lost. Because we can pay money to people here rather than foreign investors. But to deliver that fair transition, we need to make decisions quickly. Say that.
And it's a part of the just transition as well.
Would you all join me in giving a very warm welcome?